The Jobs and Prosperity Council is comprised of a group of leaders with very different and diverse views, different backgrounds, different political affiliations. We have 4 council members with us today who will be speaking. We have Reza Satchu, who is Managing Director of Alinvest Capital Management, who is going to discuss both going global as well as entrepreneurship and innovation. We have Jim Stanford, economist with Canadian Auto Workers, who will be discuss manufacturing. We have Michael McCain, President and Chief Executive Officer of Maple Leaf Foods, who will be discussing regulatory reform, and Nitin Kawali, President of Cisco Systems Canada, who will discuss business supports, and I will provide some comments on skills, training, and education and immigration. But again, this is very much meant to be interactive. I should say that in addition to these individuals, we also have on our committee Kevin Lynch, who is the Vice Chair of our Jobs and Prosperity Council, and also Vice Chairman of BMO Capital Markets. Bonnie Brooks, who's President of HBC. George Cope, President and CEO of BCE. Linda Hasenfratz, CEO of Linamar. Genevieve Knuff, owner of GCK Consulting Limited. Daryl Lake, who is founder and former CEO of Northern Centre for Advanced Technology. Mike Lazar-Reeder, who is founder and Vice Chair of Research in Motion. Jim Repos, founder and CEO of Samco Machinery, and Jeff Wensterdeed, chairman of Windmill Development Group. So we've had a very good, diverse group. As I say, we've tried to engage a lot of other groups across the province, which we hope to do more so today. So if I could ask my colleagues from our council to join me on stage. Welcome. So what I'm going to do, and I guess I am somewhat the moderator here, but what I'm going to do is ask each of my colleagues to make some comments on some of our subcommittee areas of focus. As I said, we don't want to get overly granular because even though we have formed a number of recommendations, this is not the right time to release them. It's more of an opportunity to talk broadly about the directionally where we're going, as I say, solicit some input, and our objective is to have our report ready for late this year or early next year. So I'm going to start with Reza Satchu, who is going to discuss both going global and entrepreneurship innovation. We're going to go through each of the areas, and then we're going to open it up for comments, discussion, questions, etc. So with that, I'll turn it over to Reza.
Great. Thanks, Gordon. I thank you for that overview. I think that's an excellent overview of both the challenges and the opportunities that Ontario faces. On the one hand, there's obviously some very good news. If you listen to Gord's report, there are many things that Ontario has that are tremendous advantages. We've got a highly skilled workforce. We've got a low tax environment. We've got a system that's stable. But I want to just focus on 2 statistics that Gord mentioned that will dovetail to the areas of going global and entrepreneurship that I'm spending some time on. And the 2 statistics that really stuck out for me, and I think they bear repeating because they're astounding, is that China and India today represents 1.7% of the trade for Ontario. This is a province whose success is dependent on trade, and 1.7% of our trade today is dependent on China and India. The second stat that was interesting that I read in the materials was that around entrepreneurship, and there are many things we can talk about here, but one that struck me as relevant was that if you look at the if you cut up North America into 20 jurisdictions, Ontario is 18th in terms of venture capital investment. And using that as a proxy in terms of capital markets that might be interested in investing in new ideas, new products that might be attractive to a global market, we are quite far behind. So I want to talk about these two things as a basis for what we describe as the prosperity gap. So prosperity, I think it's important to define what a prosperity gap is. It's effectively just the GDP per capita of our province, and we talk about the gap versus the United States, which of course is increasing over the past decade pretty dramatically. And there could be, one of 2 reasons why that's happening. One is because our labor force utilization, either it's not working hard enough, it's not smart enough, and it's not participating enough. And what we see is that that's not the case. We have more participation than the U.S. We have equally or higher skilled people, and to many people's surprise, they work just as hard in terms of the intensity of their effort. And so where we fall down is on the fourth component, which is productivity. Okay, how effective are we at GDP per capita per hour worked? And I think that two fundamental drivers around this is our ability to create products and services that are attractive to the world economy, and our ability to actually have new products and new services from an entrepreneurship and innovation perspective. In terms of going global, and I'll try not to repeat what Gord said, but I think this concept of a two-tiered world is critical, just at the very simple level. We are trading with partners that are growing at 1 to 2% a year. We are not trading with countries that are growing 6 to 8% a year. I mean, just in the simplest terms. You know, it's math, which will tell you that in a few years, the U.S. percentage of the total world GDP will go from 38% to 24%. China, India, Brazil, and some of the emerging markets will grow from 6% to more than 2.5% that time. The Chinese middle class in 2030 is projected to be 1.4 billion people. Okay, U.S. and Europe, Western Europe at that time is going to be 700 million people. So these are not, I mean, these are statistics that I think are huge opportunities for us in terms of how do we actually think about taking advantage of what is pretty irrefutable and what we can see is happening. And really, I think Ontario has a choice between creativity and innovation or low cost and enormous scale. Right? And it's very hard to imagine that we would win on the latter. Given our size, it's very hard to imagine that we would win on the latter proposition. And so the real questions that I think we want to get into some dialogue around is, why is it that we have 7% of our SMEs exporting? Only 7%. And even the amount they export, which is on average about $450,000, would rank them 47th out of the 50 states in the United States. So these are pretty dramatic statistics, and I think we are very open to having a dialogue around why this exists. Quickly on the second point, to compete globally, we clearly need to foster conditions where entrepreneurship and innovation can grow. You know, Gord mentioned that our business R&D is very low, despite incredibly generous government tax credits, right? So despite the fact that we have some of the Western world's most generous tax credits, government tax credits, the amount of private investment in R&D lags the U.S. dramatically. And this, you can see this in the results. Our patents, the amount of patents per employee in the Ontario are 33% less than the amount of patents per employees in the U.S. We spend a lot of money, and we've got great research institutions, but there seems to be a disconnect between the money we spend on research institutions and how much of that actually translates into commercialization and real success. Okay, how much of that actually translates into products that customers, not just in Canada, but customers worldwide want. We spoke about VC. This is a critical problem. It's hard to start a business if there isn't any venture capital. I actually think that here the private sector has to step up. This is not a government issue. This is really an issue of trying to create an ecosystem around entrepreneurs and private sector folks who can actually drive real venture activity. And I just want to close by saying that at the end of the day, I think the most important thing that we can do in terms of this component of entrepreneurship is actually help foster a culture of entrepreneurship with our young people. And you know, you can both see this anecdotally and empirically that there is a real fear of failure and a real fear of risk-taking with our young people, and that manifests itself, of course, throughout as they progress in their business careers. And so, one of the things that I think we would challenge everyone to think about is, how do we actually create a culture where trying and failing is okay? Because I'll tell you, you learn a lot more by trying and failing than not trying at all. And so I think inculcating this entrepreneurship gene early on is something that we're spending some time thinking about, because it's not something that you can teach at the age of 40 or 50. And so those are sort of some overview comments, and I think I think I and certainly the panel here would be very curious in engaging in some dialogue with you.
Thank you, Reza. And as I say, one of the things we're going to be trying to do is find concrete ways to solve some of those issues. How do we ensure better access for small and medium-sized business to export markets? As a good example of that. I'm now going to turn the podium over to Jim Stanford, who is economist with the Canadian Auto Workers, who is going to discuss manufacturing. And I might just add, before I turn over Jim, it was quite interesting that our subcommittee was actually co-chaired by Jim and Michael McCain on manufacturing. After they had a series of meetings, Michael came to me somewhat surprised and said, it's quite incredible. I said, I've been working with this guy, Jim Stanford. And he says, it's unbelievable. We agree on 99.9% of everything. And I don't think he could remember what the 0.1% was that they didn't agree on. So, but it does highlight the fact that if you're in the manufacturing business, which both Michael is and Jim is, but perhaps look at it from different perspectives, these issues are very similar. And as I say, we're all in the same team here in trying to solve some of those issues. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you very much, Gord. Luckily, the CAW does not represent the workers in Michael's factories, in which case that 99.9% agreement might shift downward just a bit.
No, not at all.
In terms of the policy issues, I think we are fully aligned, and I do want to recognize Michael's role in co-chairing this of the committees. Michael's pinch hitting on the regulatory side in this presentation, but on the manufacturing issues and the importance of manufacturing, and the sorts of tools that can take it to a new era of prosperity rather than decline. We're absolutely off the same page. And we do represent the two largest sectors of manufacturing in Ontario, the auto sector and the food sector, which continue to have a very strategic importance. As you know, we've all been through tough times in manufacturing over the last decade for a range of reasons. And policy has been focused perhaps on trying to arrest that decline or try and save what we could from that decline, and rightly so, given the challenges that we faced. The auto restructuring effort obviously was a crucial example of very important productive intervention by the government, both provincially and federally, in concert with the U.S. government to save this important pillar of our economy, and there were similar things done in other sectors. I was very gratified last night to see President Obama actually get political benefit in the election from their role in saving the auto industry, and I hope that our governments here get similar recognition for their role. We want to change the channel a little bit, though, in the discussion to talk about making manufacturing a source of growth and future prosperity rather than arresting decline. Our manufacturing is turning around in Ontario. It has bottomed out since 2009. It's coming back in terms of output, in terms of exports, a little bit in terms of jobs, and not enough. We want to see more of a recovery. We want to win back more of what we've lost. But the fact that we're going in the right direction is very encouraging, and I think it's good for us to talk about it in terms of the positive opportunity of the sector. That helps to shift people's understanding in popular culture about manufacturing as a source of prosperity, as an opportunity for future employment. We have scanned all of the different factors that go into a business case for a successful manufacturing investment in Ontario, and we both believe that the primary enablers, if you like, in manufacturing are in place. We do have the know-how. We've got top quality skilled labor. We've got good infrastructure. We also think that we have a competitiveness in terms of labor costs. We scanned the situation even with an overvalued currency, even with the dollar at par, because of the link with the resource and commodity prices and so on. There's not much to choose from between Ontario and American jurisdictions on fully loaded labor costs. So we think that the conditions are there. We've agreed that the key thing that's missing is what Gord highlighted in his overview, which is a real need to step up the level of business investment in fixed capital, in innovation and new products and processes. That's, in our view, kind of the secret sauce. And Gord mentioned that companies in Canada have been underinvesting, and we need to address that challenge. The benefits of business investment are far more than just the benefits captured by an individual business that's doing it. In economic terms, if you like, the social or public benefits of stronger investment exceed the private benefits. We all have a stake in seeing more capital spending take place because it boosts spending power, it creates jobs directly, it enhances the scale and productivity of our operations here, and it's crucial to competitiveness, both on price and non-price grounds, in our home markets as well as in export markets. We've heard a lot in Canada about this issue of so-called dead money, if you like, cash flow that is there, money that's available to spend, but companies are not sufficiently taking the plunge yet to put that money into motion, to bring that dead money back to life, if you like, in economic terms. Michael and I have had no hesitation in identifying manufacturing as a sector with strategic importance, special strategic importance, as Gord's introduction mentioned, and no hesitation at all in tailoring some of our policy recommendations to zero in on manufacturing. We absolutely recognize it's a structural importance in the provincial economy, and we shouldn't shy away from doing things just for manufacturing in order to make the most of that. The term that was traditionally used, and Gord used it today, is industrial policy, and that has fallen out of favor in some circles, who denigrate it as a question of picking winners or use other terminology. But the reality is, if we aren't focused in ensuring that Ontario's manufacturing base is present, profitable, and growing, then we're going to not be able to succeed in moving forward for the whole economy. Our strategy, when we get to it, when we get to the specific recommendations, will focus on that task of investment capital spending. So we'll be looking at measures to encourage and push companies to invest more. Frankly, I think our measures would be much stronger if we had the federal government on side with that as well. This is a provincial initiative, but the federal government holds many of the policy tools. So we'll also be making the case for manufacturing to be a national economic priority, not just a provincial economic priority. The reality is Canada does depend on manufacturing. Manufacturing is more important for GDP, for employment, for exports, even than the energy sector. And we all recognize that energy is a national priority for Canada today. We think manufacturing should be as well. So thank you, Gordon. I look forward to the feedback from the audience.
Thank you very much, Jim. And the example that I like to use for all the defeatists out there who give up on these sectors, to highlight that, who don't believe you can have successful manufacturing with higher levels of wages. All you have to do is look at Germany as an example of a country who's got it right with a very sound industrial policy around manufacturing. So we look forward to the recommendations in that area as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Michael McCain. As Jim said, Michael is pinch hitting a little bit. He is going to be discussing regulatory reform today, which was actually George Cope's area, but I believe George is tied up on a little transaction these days. But Michael, regulatory reform revolves around a lot of different areas, and I always like to use the example, and I'm sure it's because of the industry that I represent, but when we survey small business and you ask what the biggest challenges for small business is, access to capital is actually way down the list. At the top of the list is regulatory burden, and regulatory reform is obviously something that we'd like to address in our recommendations. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Gord. I would like to just make a couple of comments with respect to the manufacturing group that Jim just talked about, and highlight the most important factor, which is that Jim and I were participated in this with incredible collaboration, and I want to underscore how we were in fact 100% aligned, not just in the diagnosis, but in our perspective on the potential remedies. So we do believe that manufacturing has had this Rodney Dangerfield kind of a thing going on with not getting enough respect, and we need to transition that into a vision that is robust and interesting and rewarding for not just the province but the country, and in doing so really address what's been around for a long time, this mystery of the productivity gap in Canada, which we both agree is not the absence of ideas, the absence of skills, or the absence of motivation, but more the absence of a business case. And that's what we intend to focus on. So on regulatory burden and all of the adjunct issues around that. I am representing the work that was incredibly led by Genevieve and George, and sadly neither one of them, for good reason, couldn't be here today, but participated with incredible interest in the work that they did for the council, certainly starting out with the observation of what that burden means to business and to job creators in the province. Statistic by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is very compelling as they articulate the total cost of the regulatory burden in the vicinity, or compliance in the vicinity of $11 billion. This is real money in the world of governments. So we certainly paid attention to that. Having said that, there's a lot of progress that has been made on a number of different fronts to improve this environment in the last number of years. Things like the Open for Business initiative, which has logged, I think, 80,000 regulatory requirements that have been eliminated through that process. What's been measured, I think, is a 17% reduction, a good, standing start, I guess. Things like the harmonization of taxes, commercial or corporate tax and sales tax, which certainly is a regulatory advantage, I think, to all sectors of business. And a number of different ministries, particularly in the area of a Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, that are looking at improving the regulatory framework and modernization throughout their mandate is an important part of it. So there has been progress made, but it's a significant burden. Virtually every consultation that was engaged described the burden of regulation. I don't think anybody has a vision of the elimination of a regulatory framework or regulation in and of itself. I think the discourse has been mostly based on finding the right balance in all of the different issues. So it's been an issue. It's been a factor of balance and striking that balance between all of the various interests that get evaluated. It's about effective regulation, not bureaucratic regulation. Effectiveness sometimes displayed in terms of even things like responsiveness, time and responsiveness to just get an answer, if you will, in terms of what the regulations were meant to accomplish. So I think there's an expectation that there will be some concrete recommendations provided to the public sector, to government, and on how to improve this regulatory burden and open up the ability for the job creators to do their magic. And in the future, the table's set. I think the framework needs to be put in place for that job to get done. So good work been done by George and Genevieve, and I know if they were here today, they'd do a much better job of representing it than I. So there you go.
Thank you, Michael. I think you did an outstanding job. And I might add too that it's no coincidence that Genevieve is from the north, and when we talk about regulatory burden, it affects all industries and all sectors. But you can be assured that part of our report will deal with opportunities in terms of Northern Ontario as well, where there is obviously significant work to be done. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nitin Kowali, who is the president of Cisco Systems Canada, which I might add is I actually spent some time with Nitin on some business issues yesterday, which I would say is growing the way we want international companies to grow. It's growing as a Canadian company with Canadian research, with Canadian innovation, with more employment here and so forth. And Nitin is going to discuss business support. So with that, over to you, Nitin.
Thanks, Gord. So business support is a bit of a different group, because what we have to factor in is obviously the current level of monies in the envelope, what the future level is going to be in the envelope, but also make sure that we factor in monies through business support for the great recommendations that are coming out of the other working groups. So I'm not going to talk about some of the macro issues. I think Gord and Reza and others talked a lot about the macroeconomic issues, the challenges and opportunities that we have. But my partner Kevin Lynch and I on this, we factored all of those in as we looked at a new approach to business support. So let me give you some of the foundational data points that we started to work with as we analyzed this. So spending on direct business supports, primarily grants and loans programs, has grown significantly in the province, from $675 million in 2006 and 7 to $1.31 billion in 2010 and 11. And tax expenditures, which is indirect support, have also increased from $1.88 billion to $2.31 billion. So there's a lot that the province does. In the 2012 budget, the budget pledged to reduce expenditures on business supports by $250 million by 2014 and 15, and also to reduce the administrative costs by 25%. So as we looked at all of this, we found that there are 39 direct business support programs delivered by 7 government departments, as well as 10 tax credits administered by the Ministry of Finance. And we've seen the Drummond report, and one of the quotes out of there is that in its attempt to evaluate the effectiveness of the business support programs, the Drummond Commission found that the business support programs lacked a clear and coherent objective. And this creates significant challenges for tracking and evaluating program costs against outcomes. So we need to take a new approach to business support. So obviously, having too many programs impairs coordination and alignment, increases administrative costs, and often disadvantages smaller firms. So is it possible to move to a smaller suite of programs informed by clear policy goals? Look at governance, look at measurement, look at a feedback loop that would either enhance these programs or make changes to them. And is there a possibility to better align business supports to promote sustainable jobs and sustainable competitiveness? So we pondered a bunch of thoughts and questions that I'd like all of you to also consider. Is that what should business support programs attempt to accomplish, and what should they focus on? We deliver in Ontario business supports through a variety of mechanisms. The types of support, direct and indirect, need to have a common set of outcomes focused on sustainable jobs and sustainable competitiveness. So how can funding be more effectively directed to those outcomes that we desire? And what should the delivery approach for direct supports be based on? A single entity or multiple points of contact? And we also pondered, is there an advantage to tax credits versus grant programs? So I've kind of shared with you the foundational data points, sort of what the state of the union is, and what our opportunities are and the questions that we're considering. So really welcome feedback from all of you on those questions we're currently pondering.
Thank you very much, Nitin. And I will just end by talking a little bit about skills training, employment, immigration, and then we will open it up for general discussion. One of the challenges with skills training, employment, and immigration, those are big topics. Our reforming the provinces or the federal governments in the case of immigration or education policy is a little bit above our pay grade in terms of our ability. But having said that, there are clearly areas of great competitive strength, as I talked about earlier in my remarks, but also some things where we have to push change to hopefully provide a better match going forward in terms of our workforce demand and workforce supply. And that's not just, again, government. That's employers. That's in particularly small and medium-sized business, which represent a very large percentage of employees across this province. More can be done to capitalize on the talent that we have. We have to align training and education with the needs of our labor force. We have to shift more training from the classroom to the workplace. We have to address gaps in our labor market, particularly around skills, trade people, and no surprising, Linda Hasenfratz was on this group, and again, a wonderful Ontario-based manufacturer that competes globally, but has some real challenges around skills trade people. But again, very progressive in terms of some of the things that they've been doing. Provide students with more experimental learning opportunities, and as I said in my comments, ensure that talented students who come to this country to learn, immigrants, etc., stay, and that we take advantage of their strengths and so forth. There are labor market efficiency. As I said, we have a two-speed labor market. Some employers in some sectors are struggling to find qualified people, and then we have high rates of unemployment, particularly with respect to youth unemployment. Employment and training supports across governments certainly could be more effective and better coordinated. In terms of some of the areas that we are focusing on, and again, there's all sorts of stats that I'm going to stay away from because, amongst other things, you're quite familiar with them. But some of the things that we're looking at is sort of built around how do we do a better job in terms of entrepreneurship, education, development, training, right from the school level through. How do we do a better job in terms of rebranding our trades, in terms of opportunity and employment and career and future? The definition of trades is something that's being looked at by this group, and how do we develop good partnering programs and so forth so that we can develop the right training with the right skills that are needed. So again, around this area, it is a big opportunity for us. We've got this incredible breadth of talent when you look at our education system and where we stack up globally, when you look at our immigration policies and where we stack up globally. There is a big opportunity, but there's more that we can do in terms of ensuring that we've got this proper match between labor demand and labor supply. So those are broadly the areas that our subcommittee have focused on. As I say, one of the things that I would emphasize is that when you look at what we are trying to do, it's by no means a condemnation of what government have done in the past. This province has an incredible, history and track record to lean upon. But it's more a question of the world is changing. What do we focus on? How do we refocus our industrial policy, if you want to define it that way, and our policies across the province to deal with a new environment, with a new world where winners and losers are going to be defined very differently than they have been in the past. It's not something that just Ontario is dealing with. It's being dealt with state by state in the United States. It's being dealt with by governments around the world. But in our case, we have to figure out ways that work for us, ways that reposition our businesses so that we've got every competitive advantage that we need to compete globally. So those are sort of our formalized comments, and as I say, we can certainly engage by asking you some questions, but what we'd really prefer is some sort of perspective around these areas, views. Questions are certainly welcome, but we'd also encourage comments as well, and things that are challenges to your businesses or to your specific sectors, or things that you would like to see in terms of supporting ultimate sustainable job growth across the province. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor. Yes, there's a question or a comment right in the middle. And if you'd like to address a question specifically to one of our panel members, please feel free.
Okay, thank you very much. Harold Wilson, Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. And one thing I do want to talk about is the regulatory side. Comment and then interested in some feedback. By the way, very pleased to have Genevieve Knopf on the council. We couldn't have picked, or we wouldn't have been represented by anybody more dynamic and well-versed than she. One of the things I want to talk about is, and it's going to sound a bit stereotypical, again, I come from northwestern Ontario, And I take a look at the regulatory end as something that really needs to be addressed, because I would hate to start handing out T-shirts that say we have nothing but potential. We need to take that potential and realize it. And the issue of the regulatory burden is this. We had a bit of a discussion yesterday on government. You know, what can government do? Well, government has many different faces. There's the face that we sometimes see and we talk about, and it was talked about today, the facilitating side, which is something like the Ministry of Economic Development and Innovation. And I would suggest that it's based on culture and it's based on reward systems. And with that ministry, the reward is based on making something happen. That's what the reward system is. That's what the culture is. How can we make something happen? How can we realize some of the issues about business support, some of these? The regulatory side is very much the culture is based on keeping something bad from occurring. And the reward systems are based on that. So any movement forward, something bad might happen, we're not going to do it. And this is the issue of balance that you mentioned. And we've seen in the last while that that balance has really, really tipped over. And so the main issue is keeping something bad from occurring. So if nothing happens, they win. And that's not good for our economy. And we have some specific issues. We have things right now that we're facing, issues of changes to the Endangered Species Act, which have a huge impact on business. And I would suggest that's an area that's out of balance. I'll give up the microphone in a sec, but one more point I would make is that at one point, you know, we had 5 paper mills in Thunder Bay, and then we went down to 1. But we didn't see some of the changes at some of the ministries. So I made a prediction a couple years ago, 3 years ago, and that is that companies that never saw anybody from Ministry of Labour or Environment would be visited, and those that saw them once a month would see them once a week. Because, sorry, but the devil finds work for idle hands. And sure enough, that's what happened. Companies that never saw anybody, that weren't in that business, all of a sudden were visited by the Ministry of Environment and written up because of the way that they were changing windshields and perhaps weren't disposing of it in the right area. Or companies like Bombardier that are now visited every week because people have to get out there, people have things to do. So I would really hope that this is an area that's going to be reviewed, that's going to be reviewed very seriously, and is taking a look at because the challenge to government is a cultural one. And that, I'm afraid, really has to come from the top down. It's not going to come from the people on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, and frankly, I think are outstanding comments, and you can take some comfort in the fact that that this is an area that we will certainly be addressing, and having Genevieve on the committee has been a real source of strength. You know, one of the things that you learn, and we've spent a lot of time, you know, working with different government departments, not just the political sector, but members of the civil service, and you know, it's interesting. Most people always intend to do the right thing. They're trying to do what they believe is the right thing, what they believe their responsibility is. And as you say, you know, when it comes to the regulatory burden, a lot of that is built around not preventing things from happening, but making sure that you know, every I is dotted, every T is crossed, so that there's you know, limited challenges exist. But there is very little in the way of incentive around making things happen, around creating jobs, around creating economic prosperity. So they're doing the right thing given their responsibility, yet not necessarily focusing in on other factors that are very important to business, that are very important to employment, that are very important to economic growth. And that is a very important debate that we have to have, because if debate is just around safety and soundness and not around prosperity and growth, then you know you've got a limited debate that's ultimately not going to result in a good outcome. And one of the things that we are looking at is how do you change that incentive system within government, within the various ministries, and so forth. So it's certainly something that we will be delving into. And as you say, it takes leadership, because ultimately the political leaders have to stand up and say, this is how we want our ministries to operate. Yes, we want safety and soundness. Yes, we want the right you know, environmental protections. We want that, but at the same time, we also have to factor in, you know, how do we make things move forward so that we ultimately end up with a good result for all of the people in the province. So I think you'll you'll certainly see some of that dealt with within the report. I apologize for answering, but I didn't want to put Michael on the spot, who with Genevieve and George not here. I don't know, Michael, whether you have anything to add to that.
Well, not really, Gord. But I think the operative word is the word balance, and striking that right balance. The challenge is, how do you get practical, common sense, good judgment balance built into a regulatory framework and business and process, and that's the challenge. So there is, I think the diagnosis is pretty clear. Got to focus on exactly how we accomplish that.
Yes.
I found it quite puzzling that skills training and immigration were kept separate from going global. I don't have a lot of expertise in the area, but I find oftentimes immigrants are a demographic that are grossly underemployed, and they're not tapped for the fact that they have connections to their home country. So I was wondering, with the panel, what your guys' plans are to kind of combine the two together to deal with keeping immigrants here and also tackle to kill two birds with one stone, I guess, to put it simply.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I would tell you that although we had these various subcommittees, obviously the group meeting collectively is where we've tried to formulate a policies, because there's not only linkage between skills, training, education, immigration and going global, there's a huge linkage between, manufacturing and going global, between innovation and so forth. So it's not like there are going to be, separate, there's going to be a lot of linkages between the two. But, your point is extremely value. I mean, again, I describe it as Canada's great competitive advantage, and I hope everybody in the room continues to talk about it, because, we are so blessed as a country to have an incredible opportunity built around immigration and diversity in this country, particularly in today's world, where so many countries are struggling with higher rates of unemployment, socioeconomic issues, single sector societal problems with respect to their immigration policies. We don't have that in Canada. And the opportunity is not just attracting and providing opportunity to build strength and prosperity here, but if we truly are going to go global, then you've got to be able to take advantage of the diversity, the multiculturalism that exists in this country, to take advantage of places like India and China. So it is absolutely it's a key linkage, because it is, as I say, I think it's if you believe that you should play to your strengths, it is one of this country's strengths.
But Gord, if I could just add very briefly to that, in terms of killing two birds with one stone, we're not going there, because that's going to put us smack up against the endangered species. We have to finesse at the same time. So I just thought we should clarify that.
But a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, so we can't forget the North. There's a question over here. Yes.
Good morning. Mike Luce, CEO of the Canadian Diabetes Association. I certainly want to applaud you and the group for their work. It's an unenviable task to try and sort out such a complex issue and to come up with 5 themes and 6 subgroups. One thing that was interestingly missing for me was the issue of health and wellness in the workplace. In this economy with an aging population of workers, and certainly on the forefront over the next few years and perhaps decade, that people will be remaining in the workplace longer. Chronic disease is having a huge impact on the economics of our businesses and the lives of our employees. And I'm wondering where the conversation on health and wellness arose and how it was dealt with in your deliberations.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question and comment. And probably, honestly, the answer is not enough, because there is to some degree, not a limitation on what we can do, but given the time frame and so forth, what we're attempting to do, as I say, is broadly around these areas have a series of recommendations that push us in a certain policy direction. But where it did zero in on is this issue around, again, it's sort of industrial policy competitive advantage. I mean, one thing that we do have in this province is an incredible cluster of health care services and health and life science services, research capability. And one of the things that we have talked about, and we believe, how do we take advantage of that in terms of prosperity and growth going forward from a policy perspective. So, you know, healthcare is a huge opportunity for this province in terms of prosperity, global competitiveness, and everything else. So we have dealt with it from that perspective, but less so in terms of specific workforce areas. I don't know whether anyone else has any comments on the panel. Yes.
It seems to me that business can't keep blaming government. Lack of innovation. I work in the mining industry, trying to bring innovation to mining, very conservative industry. But you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. If we have a lack of innovation happening in the executive level, and we do, because all the measures that you've mentioned point to that, if innovation doesn't happen because of lack of business case, it's the executive level's job to make that happen, not government. So if we have selected a generation of business leaders who were the safe pair of hands in difficult times, we're no longer under cost pressure. We need dynamic leadership into a new economy. That's not a safe pair of hands. That's somebody who can gauge risk and take action. The job of executives is to execute. The problem right now is there's no downside for taking no action.
So I think one of our conclusions was, and I feel pretty passionately about this, is that I think Canadians are as good a risk taker as anybody in the world. I think Canadians and Ontarians are as smart as anybody in the world. I think Canadians and Ontarians are as hardworking as anybody in the world. And so I don't believe that business case is a leadership issue. I don't believe it's a motivational issue. I don't think it's a skill issue. I don't think it's any of those people that those factors. And I believe Jim, and certainly the work that we did in the manufacturing side, agrees with this fully. Is not, you know, it's not something that is self-reflecting or demeaning to us as people, as citizens, or as leaders. It's you know, we suffer in the world of innovation. As a business case, we suffer from the fact that we're kind of small, right? We're 30 million people, you know, about the size of the state of California, and you know, we need to develop business cases that good people, good risk takers, with the right motivations, the right skills, can actually execute. So actually, there might be a role of government in trying to incentivize and lead the right behavior from these good people. Right? So you know, that's what we're trying to focus on, is what are tangible actions that can be taken, real actions that can be taken to create a better business case for the people that are required to back and support this. You know, I personally find it a little weary of people around the world, either self-reflecting or otherwise, saying that, you know, that you know, we're either not as hardworking or not as you know, not as innovative or not as smart or not as risk takers, or that we're, you know, that we hold back. I just don't think that's the case. I see it every day. We're as good as anybody else anywhere in the world. We just need to focus on the business case of innovation, the business case of productivity, and if we do that, we'll find the right answer.
Yeah, I would just add that I think you can't lead a horse necessarily to water, but you can push them in that direction. And a lot of countries around the world push, including the United States, who probably have the most sort of open risk-taking sector, but they still have policies that push. And what we're trying to do is you know, provide as many pushes as we can. If we fail as businesses to take advantage of that, then there's nothing government can do about it. Shame on us. But we're trying to find those ways of pushing. Now, that someone was a Yahoo call-out in the back there. I can't see the back, but whoever that was.
Ken Lewenza, president of CAW. Let me, first of all, let me congratulate the Jobs and Prosperity Council and the provincial government for suggesting such a council, because the question of jobs and sectorial councils throughout the province of Ontario I think is important. I think the engagement's important. But I want to just ask two questions. And I know you indicated, Gord, in your remarks that it'll come out based on the recommendations. But when you deal with the dead cash, the CAW had a wonderful opportunity to listen to Mark Carney at our recent convention. And Mark raised the same issue. And as a result of that, there's been an incredible public profile on this so-called dead cash and the lack of investment in machinery, equipment, obviously technology, those particular areas. And Gord, in your comment, you said that we're going to find tools to utilize to get those that dead cash put back into the economy. I was just wondering if you could share one of those ideas or one of those tools, because I think it's important. On the other area, you also raised the question of procurement. And I think that, too, is also important. As the Chamber of Commerce president got up from Thunder Bay, Bombardier, the plant in Thunder Bay today, is hired 600 to 700 people in the last 2 to 3 years as a result of a procurement policy relative to buying products manufactured here in Canada for the utilization of municipalities like Toronto and others. So when you see 500 or 600 jobs and you talk about young people, I heard you at the beginning, Gord, somebody said, grab that young person, squeeze them, bring them over, check their entrepreneurial skills. If you walk into the Bombardier plant today, you will see 500, 600 young people utilizing their skills, utilizing their talents. And a lot of that was based on a procurement policy established beginning at the municipality in Toronto and other municipalities in the country. So my question to you is, again, the tools I think is incredibly important, because if you leave it for the volunteer spirit, that hasn't been the case in the last couple of years. And then obviously on procurement and the tools, I want to say to the folks that are in this room here today, I believe you have a tremendous amount of influence. And I think you have a tremendous amount of influence to recognize the importance of the manufacturing sector. I don't want to be partisan at this particular time, but there are federal members in cabinet suggesting that manufacturing is a dying industry. And the facts of the matter is they're ignoring this industry on multiple fronts. And I believe the people in this room want value-added jobs, jobs that pay decent wages, decent benefits, decent conditions, jobs that build this great province of Ontario. And I would ask for your support in this kind of an initiative in terms of concentrating on manufacturing and its importance to the Canadian and Ontario economy. So again, I'm looking for some tools, and I'm looking for everybody to put up their hands on a procurement policy. Thank you.
Very good comments. And, on procurement, we've got to, you're right, we've got to tackle and have the right set of policies because, again, I come back to this issue. People within government are usually trying to do the right thing based on the set of rules that are in place, but we impose a set of rules that make procurement a disadvantage in many cases to Canadian companies, let alone small Canadian companies. That's one of the issues that we hope to address. We obviously have to comply with our global trade agreements and interprovincial trade agreements, but there's no question that we are the Boy Scouts of the world. I mean, if America can have Buy American, surely we can have procurement policies that don't disadvantage our own companies. On the dead money issue, and Mark and I debate this frequently, but it is a good point, but obviously the context of the global environment comes into play. But I would tell you that when you actually survey across most major industries, probably tough saying this today given a couple of recent announcements in the oil and gas sector, but that's for different reasons. If you survey across most industries, I mean, financial services, our CapEx is higher today than it ever has been. Energy, higher than it ever has been. Mining, higher than it ever has been. The cash on the balance sheets of companies is not necessarily a lack of investment in certain sectors, but when you've got a global economic environment, you've got a lot of companies who are being very conservative because, frankly, they're scared. And I think where that's most profound is when it comes to small and medium-sized enterprise, which is the heart of the economy in this country. And so we have to do things to try to encourage that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who looks specifically at this sector. I think they're looking for one or two ideas in terms of some of the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, we're under strict orders not to give away what we're doing, and that's partly because we haven't really decided what we're doing. So I feel I was lucky enough as the one Labour guy on this panel to get on the panel. I don't want to get booted off of it for having loose lips.
We're all Labour guys.
Even if
it's just different forms. To answer your question specifically, I mean, one of the things that we will embed into this is a couple of things that we're going to encourage from a policy perspective to push the horse in the right direction. And that's all we can do. I mean, we want to make it. We want to, provide the incentives to CapEx spending, move it in a certain direction, and then ultimately, as I say, it's up to small businesses, large businesses, all of us to step up and and start taking some of those risks and making some of those investments. So some of those. There will be some things to push companies to be a little more aggressive in CapEx. But as Jim says, we can't precisely say what that is at this point. Yes.
Bonnie Patterson with the universities. Just a question. You talked about, in a pragmatic sense, looking in the education training world at shifts in the mix of in-class, out-of-class, practical learning, et cetera. So if we just look at Ontario and say there are over 400 full-time equivalent students in the university sector, over 200 full-time equivalent students in the colleges, if you said how many bodies does that represent, you'd have to almost triple it. Right. So I can't help but ask the question whether you are looking at the receptor capacity in whether it's SMEs or in broader industry to actually accept what might be a fairly bold swing toward experiential pursuits. I've just finished reading the 20 strategic mandate direction documents for all the universities and 44 in the colleges, and that is a very big theme that runs through all of them. So is the receptor capacity there? Are you looking at that? I understand the recommendation. Is business and industry prepared for it?
Right. I guess, does anyone want to take that, or? I think the answer, it's obviously a challenge, but it is something that we are looking at, is how do you engage between the business community, between labor, between the universities and the teaching institutions to streamline to some degree a better process to enable the receptor capacity to increase and the opportunities to increase as well. So the answer is yes, it is something that we're looking at, and as I say, built right into the trying to push the educational system in terms of how do we make sure that we're providing the right information and the right opportunities for individuals to know that what they're training for is ultimately going to provide more opportunity in the workforce. I think that, again, we need, more coordinated strategies between education right through to demand in the labor force if we're ultimately going to position and provide, our youth with the right decision-making information to hopefully move them in a direction where they're going to develop training and skills that ultimately are going to be employable down the road. So it is something that we are looking at. Yes. Oh.
Hi, Mark Dietrich from the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. First, I hope that the Council in its final report will think carefully about intervention, plus and minus. I look at the U.S. example in a CapEx environment where the ITC, the investment tax credits of the late 70s and early 80s, drove a huge amount of capital investment. And a lot of that was driven not only by the tax credit, but also by an ability to have that transferred financially. You could structure transactions so that a tax-paying entity could take advantage of it. And oftentimes that's not available in the way Canadian tax policy is arranged. Conversely, a lot of the supports that Nitin Kowali talked about as being misaligned or unclear, I think that's a function of sustainability is not necessarily what the government is looking to do. They're looking to provide a support, and they would like to have a situation where that goes away due to solving a problem of market failure. So I'm hoping that the council will address this, and perhaps there's been some consideration of going more or going less. Any thoughts on that?
Nitin, do you want to?
Well, on the support side, and you might want to just frame the tax question again a little bit, because we are looking at the different tax incentives that are going on, the different support programs that are going on. We're looking at which of these programs need to continue, which of these need to stop, which new ones can we generate into the program. And we're putting through a lot of different filters tied to the macroeconomic conditions and the challenges and opportunities that Ontario has. So, the things that we're pondering are things like, what are the industries and the areas that are important to Ontario? And we have to look at them not only from current industries, but also future industries. What are the fastest growing industries? Which of the industries are going to create the most amount of jobs? So these are all the different kind of things that we're looking at. The good news is there's a decent envelope of things that are, of monies and opportunities. So I think there is an opportunity to put some alignment and create sustainable jobs, sustainable competitiveness. Hopefully also look at the questions of innovation and productivity, which were clearly outlined today as challenges not only for Ontario, but for Canada. So these are the kind of different filters that we're looking through the support programs. And I do believe that, yes, there are some inefficiencies, which I think we can get those 25% cost reductions. But I think there's a real opportunity here to align what was all the well-intentioned areas, but align them just a little bit better, looking at all those different filters that's going to have, I think, a significant impact for Ontario as we look 10 years out. And that's really the areas we're focused in on.
The one thing that I think is extremely important, and particularly if we're not going to disappoint, is that, given the time frame, given the day jobs, given the restraints that we have as a committee, our objective really is to come out with a smaller number of recommendations, some that will be more micro, but many that will be more macro, that ultimately are going to push the government to address some of the more macro. I mean, we can't reform the tax system on our committee. We can't reform the educational system on our committee. But what we can do is we can say that in our view, if we as a province do not go this direction in terms of structuring our tax system to provide the right incentives, and directionally this is where we're going, and this is what government should be moving towards. That's what we're trying to achieve from our group. And I think it's very important to keep that in perspective, because we're not going to provide 300 recommendations like Don Drummond's report that gets very granular into specific fiscal recommendations. Our recommendations will be a little bit more macro, but as I say, push the government to come back with implementing policy that actually deal with those issues, because if we don't deal with those issues, and if we don't come up with the right legislation and the right policies, then we're going to have the same conversation 12 months from now and 24 months from now. So I think it's really important to sort of set the table in that direction, so that hopefully we meet expectation. Yes, there's a comment here.
Good morning. I'm Max Blau, president at Wilfrid Laurier University. There's a conundrum I haven't understood, and I haven't heard any of you speak about it. And that is that we have a big productivity gap. I think we all understand that. But apparently, we don't have a profitability gap. In other words, the profitability of our companies in Ontario and Canada generally is roughly the same as that down in the US, where productivity is much higher. So a big question for me, and I wonder if you've thought about this, is what is it that is going to motivate people to mobilize dead capital, to take risks, to create jobs? when in fact our productivity remains lower, but our profitability remains higher? How do we explain that, and how do we motivate?
You know, it's interesting. So part of being on this council is you're obviously going to have different views. I think that, so to someone's earlier comment around government intervention here, I don't think this is a government problem, meaning inspiring people to take risks and to seek new opportunities. Maybe there are some things the government can do to help that, but I actually think that it comes from within, or the culture that you're creating, or the ambition and the ideas that you have. And so the question is what's preventing that here? Is it a question of scale, or is it a question of a culture around risk-taking and going after new markets and new products? And especially in the environment we live in today, where national borders don't actually have a big impact on many businesses that you might create today. You know, I think, and the work I have done at U of T for many years, I would say to you that there is a big issue around people's willingness to take risk here. And when I compare that to places down south, I think some of that is explained by the scale argument, but in the environment we live in today, I don't think all of it is. And so the question is how do you create an environment for this to happen? And what I'd say to you is that part of the compelling argument is that if you keep doing what you're doing in the environment that we live in, you will be out of business. And so when you look at these big macro trends that are going on, to your point earlier, you will be out of business. You know, so at some point that risk equation is going to look better. And I think the key thing we should try and do is to try and get that equation a little bit lower than it is today, meaning push people to make that step earlier and to think about where the big macro trends are going. And so, you know, this idea of SMEs only exporting 7%, only 7% of SMEs exporting, and frankly, the amount they export is less than 47 of the states. I mean, that is not a sustainable proposition. And so, I think there is something here in our ecosystem that we need to help with. And you see it with respect to venture capital, which again the government has been involved with, but it is not a government problem. This is around the private sector getting involved and taking some risk around backing some of our entrepreneurs.
Sorry, Nitin and then Michael.
Okay, just very quickly on productivity. First of all, innovation and productivity are generally very tightly linked. And we're not on a very good scale there internationally. But I think what's really important to realize, I just think I'll take a little different spin on this, is that it's a nationwide problem. So if you kind of segment this into large organizations, small, medium enterprises, and public sector organizations, I don't know of a single large corporation in Canada, and we deal with many of them, that aren't focused on innovation and productivity. In fact, if you're competing globally, by inherently you have to do that. But our small and medium business sector, which is 45% of our GDP, you know, you saw a lot of statistics where inherently we're not exporting. One thing we found is that when you're exporting, you have to be more productive. You have to be more innovative because you're playing on a global scale. If you look at our public sector organizations across Ontario and across the country, there are a lot of challenges there. But I think what's happening is with the dynamics that are occurring with the austerity budgets, you're starting to see governments starting to lead through this process of changing the way they do business. So we can start looking at all sorts of different reasons, but if we all take ownership of all of this, regardless of the kind of organization we're in, whether it's a university, a high-tech firm, or government entity, and start focusing in on this, because the tools and techniques, as Gord talked about before, are readily available. The case studies are all around the world. So if we as Canadians, as Ontarians, take this seriously in every single organization that we're in, I think we can make a huge impact. We all have to dissect this slowly and attack it across the board.
Michael?
So I'm going to try and tackle your question directly about the profitability gap versus the productivity gap. And I'll speak from our own experience because we've lived this. We've, in our industry, and the food industry, and certainly in the organization that I lead, we've lived the dream, if you will, and we've had both a productivity gap and a profitability gap. When the currency went to parity, it cost us $130 million a year. Our profitability was about 1/3 of our comparable peer companies in the U.S., and our choice was very simple: either fix it or sell it. And we chose, the shareholders, the board, the management team, chose to go down a path of a $1.3 billion investment in the business, believing in Canada to solve the productivity gap and therefore the profitability gap between the Canadian and the U.S. industry. So I would argue in our own experience that they are quite linked, number one. Number two is, and I think you get a taste of, we have had a great spirited debate on this council, because you know that not everybody has exactly the same perspective, and I think they're all legitimate perspectives. I personally, when I look at this notion of productivity gap and innovation and risk-taking in U.S. versus Canadian society, I lived in America for 9 years and got a flavor of it as I was there. I think Canadians are every bit as good a risk-taking as anybody in the world. I think we've got some great entrepreneurial success stories in this country that demonstrate that. We may not be as good at gambling. I think the Americans sometimes call gambling risk-taking. I don't, right? And, you know, at the end of the day, I think we're every bit as good at that on the responsible risk-taking issue. In the case of innovation or productivity gap, if the business case in a small country can be made, Canadians will go after it. And they'll work hard at it, and they'll be just as smart as anybody else doing it. And, but when they do that, they have to recognize that the productivity gap requires a business case, because usually it is, I believe in my experience, connected to a profitability gap.
Jim? One last point on this conundrum between the profitability in Canada, which has been strong in aggregate, and the productivity, which has been lousy. It very much reflects the dichotomy that we've seen in our economy between the booming resource sector on one side and other export-oriented industries on the other. In the resource sector, it has been enormously profitable, but it is a source of declining productivity for the simple reason that as you extract the most easily available resources, then you have to dig deeper to get the next deposit. So productivity has been declining secularly in the resource sector, yet that's the sector where we're putting so many of our eggs as a nation these days, precisely because it is so profitable. In terms of explaining the poor productivity, I don't know if it's risk-taking as much as it has been the failure of Canada as a country to develop the companies that will take the resources and transform them into value-added, innovative, high-technology products and services that are in demand across the world. That's what the Americans have done, what the Germans have done, what the Koreans have done. We have not done it as a country. I think in part because there's been so much easy money to be made digging stuff out of the ground and selling it to somebody else. And I think part of our whole recipe is going to have to be to address that dichotomy and make sure that we take the wealth of the resource sector, but use it to build something more diverse and sustainable in the long run.
So Jim thought he had the last word, but since I'm the facilitator, firstly, there's some really good points that are made on this discussion of productivity by various group members who look at this from a very different perspective. The only thing that I would add is that, and I think I said this in my remarks, productivity is a really difficult concept. And I hate macro productivity numbers because you really have to look at it sector by sector. I mean, the biggest industry in Ontario is financial services. Our financial services industry is as productive as any in the world. But then you get other sectors, and I think Nitin addressed small and medium-sized business where we have low productivity. And manufacturing, again, we've talked about some of those areas. So I think you've got to look at productivity to some degree lumped in with industrial policy. I mean, what it is you're trying to achieve. The other thing which hugely influences productivity, and this is is that, you know, if you look at the makeup of our country, where we've got a heavy resource sector, you know, banking, you know, we don't have representation to as broad a degree in some of the high productivity industries. As I remind people, now these stats may be old, but the last time I looked at Google, Google and Apple together are the two biggest companies in the world. Together, they employ less people than RBC. If Apple's head office was in Canada, our productivity numbers would be significantly higher because of one company when you look at the output relative to the input. So we want Apples to grow and to be in this country, but it's just very important when you talk about productivity that you sort of look at, you know, where we lack productivity and then what you do will go about solving our productivity. What though will ultimately solve it, though, and this is what we're really trying to do, is that if we create companies and we innovate companies, and our small and medium-sized businesses and our big companies export more, sell more outside the country, then productivity will ultimately get better. And that's where we don't do as good a job. As I say, I hate these macro numbers, but at the same time, you can't ignore them. And so, ultimately, we're not necessarily going to create Apple tomorrow or create Google tomorrow, but if we can actually provide more opportunities for companies to develop, to innovate, to grow, and to export, then productivity will ultimately look after itself. Okay, am I going to get the hook here from someone? That's the hook? Okay, I'm getting the hook. Thank you very much. And we...